Have you been on Pornhub lately? Let me rephrase that. Have you been on Pornhub statistics lately? I don't think that's much better. Well, I just got done taking a long, hard look at the data. I'll be honest, it felt like something was missing. If you look at the top searched categories for 2023, you'll notice there's a particular genre that seems to be absent from any gender, age, location, or device-based data set. At least, that's what you'd think if you took one look at the front page of Pornhub proper. Please don't age restrict me. Please, please. I'm getting somewhere with this. I am on my way to a point. I've got a point. I never thought I'd be saying this, but where's all the incest? You know, the keyword you can't escape from in modern pornography. It used to be pizza boys and plumbers, but now it's step-family this and in-laws that. It's literally everywhere, and not just in porn. We're inundated with incest plots from regular film and television as well, and it's been going on for much longer than you think.
Then suddenly... Oh my god. I love Josh.
I'm not talking about coincidental or convenient cases of incest, like in Star Wars, where Luke and Leia weren't initially written to be related, and they just didn't have another prominent female role to place as Luke's sister. No, I mean stories that intentionally focus on the topic of incest in their story. Take Clueless, for example. It's a modern retelling of Jane Austen's Emma, in which Cher, an underage girl with a penchant for matchmaking, surprisingly ends up with her adult brother by the end of it. Stepbrother, Andrew. They're not literally related by blood. That would be wrong. No. We're not starting this again, okay? Now go sit in the corner and try not to hit on any minors. The whole movie centers around someone who lives religiously by her social status. Stick to the status quo. Stick to the status quo. Okay. Cher forces the people around her to conform to her expectations, and she causes turmoil among her friends and loved ones because of it. But by the end of the movie, she learns that love is love. And just because you like someone who's poorer than you, or dumber than you, or more related to you than you, you know, that shouldn't stop you from... Is that really the message we're going for here? Like, what's the point of having her end up with her brother anyway? Other than the obvious fact that it's a retelling of an existing story. During the movie, Cher realizes that her stepbrother Josh is not actually a loser jerk, but is passionate about helping people and doing what's right. Similarly, Josh is wooed by Cher's change of perspective and a newfound willingness to do what's right for people, even at the expense of her social skills. And that's really all you need to start hooking up with your in-laws? Are we really retelling classic stories in a modern context for the hell of it? I don't remember Leonardo DiCaprio's Romeo and Juliet making a big deal out of the fact that Juliet was supposed to be 12, while Romeo was at least 18. Okay, so they put the relationships here at ages 21 and 17, which is still bad, but you get the point. This modern retelling of an old story just doesn't sit right. This story's message doesn't change if you make Cher and Josh not related to each other. Josh could have been an assistant to her father, giving them an excuse to interact with each other during the movie and not making it really creepy. It's his differing perspective on life, and Cher's eventual realization that there are more important things than social status that drive their eventual romance. Not the details of whether they had Thanksgiving dinner together for several years while their parents were boinking. Like, as if. And it's clear the writers went out of their way to qualify their familial relationship as much as possible. They're not related by blood, their parents are divorced, and while we don't know how long their parents were married, they're not even technically related anymore. At that point, it just seems like a convenient way to introduce the character's relationship to the audience and build a more personal history between them. If you want to tell a story about breaking social norms to be with the person you love, that's fine, but maybe also don't break literal laws at the same time, you know? Not to mention that Cher is in high school while Josh is going to college. But again, Clueless is a modern retelling of a story written hundreds of years ago. Maybe in the olden times, stuff like that just happened, right? Back when people didn't have iPhones and most died before the prefrontal cortex is developed. Oh no, I feel another part coming on. No!
I have to inform you that the eldest Miss Bennet has captured my special attention.
Oh, Mr. Collins.
I look like Dr. What? Dr. Huh? So Jane Austen published Emma in 1815, over 200 years ago, and it's not her only story to mention pairing off with your relatives. In Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet is courted by her cousin, Mr. Collins, who will inherit her family's estate after her father passes. She's vehemently opposed to the idea of marrying her cousin, mostly because he's a squeamish little nerd. This guy couldn't get any wenches even if he did own the estate. L nerd. But this story brings up a very real and shockingly relevant part of European class culture. If you marry within your family, you get to keep your wealth. Even for moderate landowners, inheritance laws encourage them to secure their marriages and money. British royalty is famous for marrying each other and keeping it in the family. Even Queen Elizabeth married her third cousin. Now you might be wondering, how distant does a cousin have to be for it to be not weird? And the answer is, if you have to ask, then you probably already know. But this wasn't just about consolidating power. No. These poor, rich rulers were beholden to the social stigmas of marrying within your class. Even if you didn't want to marry your half-step something or other, how many eligible singles did you really have in your area? There are hot rich royalty in your area. Tap to find, tap to find. Looking for a good time? We can help. Having a limited pool of people to marry definitely contributed to this stigma of incestuous marriage. But let's zoom out a bit and look at how other countries treat incest. Argentina, Brazil, India, Japan, Latvia, South Korea, Turkey, and Thailand all allow incest without legal repercussions if each person is a consenting adult of a certain age. In fact, it's technically legal in Italy as well, as long as the relationship doesn't become a spectacle. Mamma mia, it's a me and a Luigi with Daisy and Peach. A perfect four-way. Mamma mia, here we go again. While incest may occur in similar means, there isn't a legal punishment for it. And without that legal focus, we don't hear much about these actions' social stigmas or implications. They don't treat it like a big deal, so it's not a big deal. However, the West's focus on this interaction makes it much more noticeable and talked about. Jane Austen comments on these social hierarchies by having Elizabeth refuse to marry her cousin. It's a bold statement to forsake your family's future because you don't want to sleep with your cousin. That's a wild thing to say, but it's true. And giving a female character the autonomy to refuse a life of servitude in that way is powerful. Similarly, Emma finds the value in marrying her brother-in-law out of true love rather than finding a more socially suitable partner or choosing not to marry at all. These messages contrast significantly with the way European royalty views intermarriage between families. It's part of their job to consolidate and hold on to power, like some Game of Thrones type political maneuver. Speaking of Game of Thrones,
it's all fallen on me.
As has Jamie repeatedly, according to Stannis Baratheon.
I'd love to chalk the whole Jaime and Cersei bit up to a strictly clinical and calculated move on their father's part to help the Lannisters secure power in the kingdom. But you know they were sexing each other up way before Robert Baratheon was ever in the picture. Jaime's gone on record describing Cersei as having the true Lannister beauty. His will to live really does rest on his ability to be able to protect Cersei and their illegitimate and clearly inbred children. It's worth mentioning, especially while I'm in my psychology armchair, that Jaime also probably has a sister complex, in which the image of one's sister becomes idolized. They're not just attracted to their sibling, but they also feel possessive towards them. Given that all of the Lannister children had to live and suffer under the tyrannical rule of their father, Tywin, it would make sense that Jaime would seek the comfort of his twin sister, especially after the untimely death of their mother while giving birth to Tyrion. As for Cersei, this incestuous relationship was not only a means to usurp power from her abusive husband, Robert, but was also one of self-empowerment and honestly self-centeredness. Unlike Brienne of Tarth, who took up the sword to gain power through traditionally masculine means, Cersei denies Robert a true heir, opting to get him drunk enough so that she can finish him off before having actual sex. She seeks power in the way that only a woman could, by controlling who the heir to the Iron Throne is. Her relationship with Jaime was partially to secure the rule of their bloodline, but also of catharsis, and she was never given the respect, authority, or autonomy that Jaime has. Cersei wants to be Jaime, and the act of them having sex together puts her as close to him as possible. Jaime even points out later in the books that the changes to his body after being stuck in a dungeon have aged him and made him look less like Cersei, and that she would not like that. It's also mentioned that the Targaryen Targaryens intermarried to keep power within their family. And if you've seen House of the Dragon, you know what I'm talking about, as Daemon and his niece Rhaenyra get married and have sex in the show. Very similar to European royalty, the purity of bloodlines was essential to holding on to power. Although the Targaryens look much better than the Habsburgs, if you know what I mean. While this context is fascinating and still relevant today, in the US, we don't have any royalty or family bloodlines that are guarded so closely. You don't see the Waltons or the Kardashians or the Rockefellers intermarrying to hold on to their social status. Power in America is built off of wealth rather than bloodlines. So affluent families can simply marry other wealthy families to build up their fortune rather than intermarry. So why then does the US still have such a solid inclination to and even a social context for incest?
'Cause you and me, we're like brothers, only closer.
Nowhere in the United States is more associated with incest than the American South. Almost heaven, Alabama, kissing cousins, white bread and bread living. Life is old, yeah. So stupid. Okay. It wouldn't be a stereotype if there wasn't at least a little bit of truth to it, right? I mean, there's literally no other culture in the United States that's accused of incest quite like poor, white, uneducated people from the rural American South. It's interesting to note that in our past examples of British royalty, the decision to have an incestuous relationship was a calculated one, focusing on wealth, power, and status. The Appalachian and southern US are historically poor, isolated areas where the community's survival was more important than social status. That's not to say that xenophobia and racism weren't rampant in these parts. We don't talk about black incest post-slavery for a good reason. While there's not a lot of historical evidence that supports an increased amount of incestuous activity happening in places like Appalachia versus the rest of the country, the highly rural nature of these communities did make it more difficult for people to marry outsiders. Before developments like the interstate highway, these communities were extremely isolated. Even if these villages wanted newcomers to come and settle in the area, it simply took more work to make the journey. Not to mention that these regions had few opportunities for enterprising outsiders to take advantage of. There were far better odds of you making a living working in a factory or construction site in cities rather than in coal mining towns where jobs were dangerous and undesirable. If your village of 100 people goes through 10 generations of intermarriage with no one ever coming or going, eventually everyone will be related to each other to some extent. You may be left with only second or third cousins as eligible partners, or be forced to leave your hometown to find a partner elsewhere. Similarly, in the South, new landowners would need to have lots of kids to take care of the farms that they kept up. And when those children grew up, they would choose to either leave for work or stay with their family. When the children would stay, they would build a home near their parents and start a family of their own. Skip through several generations of family growth on private land with an incredibly xenophobic view of outsiders, and you have a community of very related people. These communities were case studies for genetically passed down traits that would only be achievable through repeated incestuous partnerships. Even today, these impoverished and undereducated populations in the South and Appalachian regions suffer from decreased social mobility and are largely stuck in the same place as their ancestors. Hence, from my cursory analysis, is why we associate these regions with an increased tie to incest with terms like kissing cousins and sweet home Alabama jokes. And again, there's no widely accepted empirical data that suggests this behavior was exclusive to the southern United States. I'm sure you'd find this social phenomenon in any rural part of the world. So it's not exactly fair to compare these communities to the hyper-taboo scenarios in pornography or even in sensationalized film and television. These people aren't marrying their literal brothers and sisters. They're marrying their extended cousins, and not because they specifically want to. Also, the terminology of step-family relations is nowhere near the same dynamic as the small communities with semi-distant cousins. Movies like Deliverance, which conflate these themes with the South, are in the vast minority of media we consume. I mean, we don't have droves of porn stars out there with southern drawls. And don't send me anything that proves otherwise, okay? My search history is fucked enough as it is. So Alabama was a red herring after all, just like communism.
No, Mr. Green. Communism is just a red herring.
I mean, look at the data. They're interested in fingering themselves, not mommy's milkers. So what could be so engaging about the incest trope that sees seemingly mass appeal, or at least mass acknowledgement from Western culture? And
now, this is a man that knows how to marry his cousin.
People love to hear juicy details about other people's lives. The more taboo, the better. Infidelity? Hot. Power dynamics? Yes, mommy. Surprise incest? Hell yeah. Wait, what? Take the reboot of Gossip Girl, for example. In the second season, it's revealed that Grace and Jake, two twins, are in a sexual relationship. Grace is caught cheating on her partner, Obi, and not only that, she's doing something illegal? Whoa! Such drama. I wonder how they'll play that one out. And we never see them ever again. They have this wild twist that nobody saw coming and was not alluded to at all, and then they're cut from the show so that Obi can begin a new character arc? What an incredible waste of context and character development. It's not like we haven't seen this relationship before. See Game of Thrones. But if you're going to go there, you might as well have something to say about it. That's like bringing up 9/11 in a romance movie just because it'll be sad. Wait.
As if you could outrun me! As if you could fight me off.
I've killed people before.
Like, what? Well, I just thought, you know, Grace is already cheating on Obi, so we might as well make her cheat with her brother, right? Really spice it up. No, I do not have plans to continue this plotline. There's no reason to have the characters make this decision. You just wanted to do it for the drama, for the gossip. Okay, this one gets a pass. Yeah, okay, all right. I see you. And now those characters aren't returning, and we won't get any additional context or nuance to the plotline. Like what? Is Obi gonna suddenly have a vendetta out for all twins? Is he gonna date only children from now on? Whoa. Whoa. Only childs. Single child families. Only children. As in the singular child from the... You get what I'm saying, right? If I don't get put on a list, it'll be a miracle. But like I was saying with Clueless, if you're going to bring up the whole weird thing of incest, you should have something to say about it.
I slept with you!
But it was consensual, right? Yes. Then what about that is so wrong?
Because you're my sister!
Veronica Mars, on the other hand, has a lot to say, and it's mostly bad and confusing? Let's talk about it. Besides introducing Kristen Bell to audiences for the first time, Veronica Mars is known as having one of the most convoluted and morally gray incest plots in modern television history. I'll try to make it brief here. Veronica Mars is a scorned and outcast teenage detective who was sexually assaulted at a party by an unknown assailant who she discovers could be her ex-boyfriend Duncan Kane, only to realize that she's related to him. And it turns out that they actually had consensual blackout drunk sex that Veronica doesn't remember, which is totally different than having non-consensual blackout drunk sex, and the whole thing completely ignores the fact that regardless of whether the blackout drunk sex was okay or not, pro tip, Rob, it's not. They were literally related and had sex. This isn't some Jamie and Cersei quest for power and pure bloodlines, and it also wasn't the whole, well, technically they were legally related at one point in their lives, but not by blood, and also not by law anymore shtick that Clueless does. No. This is literal incest by blood, and the parents don't do anything to tell either Veronica or Duncan that they're related. Imagine bringing your half-brother to the house and nobody mentioning that you shouldn't be dating. Bad parents. Veronica and Duncan's sexual attraction to each other can be explained through a phenomenon called the consanguineous relationship, or more plainly, genetic sexual attraction. This describes the attraction that two related individuals can have with each other that's not just limited by blood relations, but can also relate to half-siblings, adopted children, and lesser related family members. This specific phenomenon usually refers to siblings that have been reunited after a long period of separation, either through adoption or separation at a young age. In this case, Duncan is the son of his father and Veronica's mother, who cheats on Veronica's father before the start of the show. Duncan was raised by his father, and neither he nor Veronica were told about their relationship. There's actually some legitimacy to this plot. Veronica and Duncan probably would have been attracted to each other, specifically because, as humans, we're attracted to those with similar physical attributes. But the reason we're not all going nutso is because of the Westermarck effect. This postulates that people who have lived together like siblings before the age of 6 are not likely to be attracted to each other. So Veronica and Duncan being all up on each other specifically because of their physical similarities, compounded with not growing up together during a critical period when they wouldn't have been interested in seeing each other like that, is actually a pretty realistic possibility. This obviously doesn't absolve either of their parents for keeping this a secret, especially when they're literally hooking up, but that that's where the drama comes in. It's intriguing to play around with a plot like this because, through no fault of their own, they've literally done something illegal that could have biological consequences if they were to carry a baby. It also allows us to peek into the social dynamics that would still exist even without explicit laws prohibiting incest. Using relationships like this in movies and television creates taboo plot points that give viewers a chance to think, what if, without real damage done. In the case of Veronica Mars, however, it's entirely negated by the fact that there's no consent involved in the reveal of their physical intimacy, since they were both, drugged and unable to consciously agree to the act. No one is technically at fault since both of them were drugged, but it's just another situation that begs the question, why bother making them related? If you're going to focus on Veronica's possible claim to Duncan's family inheritance, then don't get bogged down by the very serious sexual assault plot you've got going on. And if you're going to have a sexual assault mystery vendetta, don't make the answer, well, technically it's no fault assault, and technically it's your brother, so maybe you should just let it go. But actually somebody did come in afterwards and actually assault you, so technically it was a real assault. Like, guys, pick a story and stick to it. But I don't think people are watching Veronica Mars, Clueless, or Gossip Girl living out the fantasies they've always wanted to have but never could. They definitely are for Game of Thrones though. But Game of Thrones is just a fantasy epic with dragons. Real life is more like a George Michael and Maybe situation.
It's gonna be a little crowded though, so I think you're gonna have to share a room with your cousin.
What you trying to say to me?
Circling back to my initial point about the inundation of incest porn, this is a relatively recent phenomenon, and though the cultural and historical and social context plays a part in the growing trend, why now? Why this? Why am I still talking about it? It boils down to a blend of flirting with taboo and efficient storytelling. What's the emotional or character-driven connection between a stay-at-home mom and a plumber, or a pizza boy, or any non-related male interaction? They've never met before, and the reason why it may be intriguing to watch is because the mystery of a chance encounter and also a taboo nod that the wife may be cheating on her husband. When you think about it, it's the act of betraying a long-term relationship, or the contrast between that long-term relationship and the spur-of-the-moment fling that's intriguing to audiences. Can we call people who watch porn audiences? Like they're giving critical reviews on Big Booby Girls 9. Yes, well I thought the acting on this one was really phoned in compared to Big Booby Girls 6. Regardless, either of these scenarios has little to do with the current on-screen relationship. One character is used as a conduit for the other's satisfaction, leaving half of the scene underdeveloped. When you compare this tired plot device with something like a MILF plot, the audience is given a lot more context to the people they're watching without the actors having to say anything. We can discern that they've known each other for a long time, most of their lives perhaps. There's internal conflict for both of the characters between their desires and the social rules they're breaking. Not to mention, there are an infinite number of locations families go to, activities they do together, and situations they might find themselves in, like, for instance, getting stuck in a dryer, getting stuck under the bed, or getting stuck in the window. Porn. Full of real, believable plots. It's easier for writers to have the characters act comfortably around each other right off the bat and throw in the relationship halfway through the action than it is to fully introduce two characters, spend time setting up their desires in the current situation, and then getting to the rest of the plot. You get more mileage with less talking using familiar relationships. And just to get away from the grossness for a little bit, the same could be said for scenes with siblings' friends, your mom's friends' children, any semi-related pairing that still has a history. People interact with these relationships way more in real life, so it's easier for them to get in the mindset of fantasizing about that relationship than, say, the pool boy. I mean, come on, how many of us actually have pools that need that much cleaning, right? I'm sure if you ask most people about their porn consumption, they wouldn't be interested in telling you about their interest in this plot line. But there's a reason almost every video seems to use familial language. And as the rise of this trope in pornography has happened, so too is the everyday slang around it.
What are you doing, step bro?
We've adopted terms of incestuous meaning into our everyday language over the last 5 or so years.
Daddy, can you pass me the salt, please?
Come on, child, for real.
Mommy?
Do I know mommy?
Sorry, mommy?
not. The beach is a bathtub.
Alright, I'm definitely on the list now. I know, that last one is actually from porn, but you get the idea. Like I always say, media is a reflection of society. And in this case, society is really pushing the boundaries of legality on this one. When we're making these jokes, we're not consciously acknowledging the legality of what we're saying, but we are flirting with the social boundaries of what's acceptable. When you try to have a serious discourse about the subject, I'd wager that most people wouldn't be down to have their partner call them mommy or daddy. Don't prove me wrong on this. I like living in ignorance. We could chalk these colloquialisms up to some Freudian analysis of Oedipus complex issues. For the last time, man, it's not complex, it's very simple. I like MILFs, but I think that would be giving Freud a bit too much credit. More likely it stems from the absolute stranglehold the Puritans and Christianity have on Western culture. Remember, many other nations haven't felt the need to make incest illegal, and as such, their language and media don't put as much weight on the concept. I wouldn't associate Japan with incest the way I would with the American South, and part of that has to do with the fact that there are literally Japanese creation stories that involve incest. For instance, the divine brother and sister Izanagi and Izanami married, and their copulation produced the Japanese islands. Compare that to the Bible, which states, "Do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother. Do not have relations with her." Leviticus 18:7. Like, yeah, we had some insecure men writing the Bible here. Alright, well, we gotta make some rules for these chosen people here. Hey man, my son's been sucking on my wife's boobs for a while now. Can we make a law against that? How old is he? Like, 3. Oh yeah, okay, we're stoning that toddler. Even in Greek and Roman mythology, incest as a concept comes up to explain the world. It's not condoned, but it does exist. Okay, I'm really starting to sound pro-incest here, aren't I? Look, you can still rationalize a human behavior and still not participate in the act of it. That's what a lot of other countries seem to be doing. And we're over here condemning the behavior while all our porn turns into an escape from condemnation. It's hard to understand the severity of repression that everyone in the United States lives under due to Christianity. And the further we separate ourselves from religious social norms, the more we'll encounter taboo subjects. I'm not saying that incest is awesome and the Bible is bad because it denounces it, but it's worth noting that as each generation rebels against the social structures they're born into, the more they'll try to overcorrect in an attempt to distance themselves from it. This results in mommy and daddy language, incest jokes, and a whole lot of incest porn. But is this a bad thing? Is it wrong for people to indulge in this demonized and foreign concept because of its taboo nature? Do we have an incest epidemic in the United States? Yeah, we kinda do. But not in the way you would think. If you noticed, I didn't bring up any incest-related moments between parental figures and children in my examples, for a reason. That kind of relationship is heavily dependent on power imbalances, and is, unfortunately, a much more common form of abuse. A relationship between two similarly aged siblings or another relation lessens the dramatic power imbalance an authority figure has on a usually underaged person. I talked about this dynamic in a previous video on adult women having sexual relationships with underage boys in media. And the same rule applies when they're related as well. This is probably the most common form of incest in the United States, and most likely the most common form of child sexual abuse as well. We tend to focus on stories of religious authority figures committing sexual crimes, but the same is true for abusive parents and is much more widespread. If there's really something that needs to be done about an incest epidemic, then it's about the guardians who take advantage of underage children for sexual gratification. Just look at the Duggars and their whole thing. Their son sexually assaulted 2 of his sisters and was caught with terabytes of child pornography. Terabytes! This epidemic is so prevalent because sexual abusers have the most direct and unquestioned access to children while in a family setting. Just as we joke around with the mommy and daddy tropes, so too do we trivialize the abusive uncle and other parental figures in a comedic way. That type of abuse is not a joke, and we shouldn't be making light of an abusive behavior that is still rampant. Okay, enough of the serious business. Let's wrap this one up. This topic is unique to tackle since it's so nuanced depending on the context in which you view it. If Bridgerton pulled out an incest plot, it would make much more sense than if Stranger Things did. What I'm always looking for when I watch movies and television that use taboo themes like this is whether they're saying something new and interesting that encourages the audience to think about why it was brought up and how they feel affected by it. Clueless doesn't really do anything to justify an incest romance. It really just seems like they had to include it so they could call it a proper Emma retelling. Veronica Mars brings up several intriguing social behaviors that could develop into a believable and complex relationship. However, combining it with an inheritance plot and flippantly adding it to a dark sexual assault experience makes it much more problematic than interesting. Game of Thrones gives a very realistic and deeply contextual relationship that is the inciting incident for the whole plot. There's a lot of potential for new stories to be told in this realm, especially with new genealogy methods like 23andMe consistently ruining family dynamics. There's a bit of a social reckoning going on, and I hope the media we see in the future reflects that shift. As we move further into a world where divorce, multi-parent families, and more liberated sex exists, we have to become more comfortable talking about these concepts. Most people from the American South aren't ashamed of marrying or being with their second or third cousins. It's a product of their environment. And if we're gonna critique it, maybe we should also fund the means to help them get out of that situation. I think over time, the novelty of incest pornography will begin to wane as new and exciting concepts emerge, especially with the progression of animation and CGI. Rule 34 is only getting started. And if people associated the reality with the language used behind mommy and daddy talk, there'd be much less interest in using that form of play so casually. Wow. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this one. You must be very intrigued by this concept in media, or you're a sicko, which I've got no hate for. You do you. If you'd like to see more spicy topics, I've got another video right over here for you to watch. And if you want to know if I get canceled after releasing this, be sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.